Well, welcome back. I've had my lunch. I feel a little better. I was starting to get a little peaked there. But beautiful day. I've been fed, and now I can continue on with our walking tour. This video is going to be called the Field of Operations in the term, and we are looking at a statue, the entrance of Dealey Plaza. And this is George Bannerman Dealey. As you can see, he died in 46. So by the time the assassination happened in 63, he's been long gone for a good number of years. But that doesn't mean his influence has gone. Of course, this part, which they call the birthplace of Dallas, bears his name. I'm sure he contributed a bunch of money to it. He was the editor of the Dallas Morning News. Actually, I think he was the owner of the Dallas Morning News. In any event, his son has taken his spot. His name is Ted Dealey. And Ted Dealey, kind of like all these other folks that JFK was encountering when he came to Dallas, who were not friendly to him. We talked about the mayor. We talked about General Edwin Walker and other folks. Well, Ted Dealey, owner of the Dallas Morning News, is not friendly to him either. Of course, it was his newspaper that ran that full-page ad from the John Birch Society the morning JFK arrived. Ted Dealey had done something very few people did in those days. He had actually come out and said something very disrespectful to JFK in his presence. In a speech, Ted Dealey said, while JFK was sitting in the audience, quote, "We need a man on horseback to lead this nation, and many people in Texas and the Southwest think that you are riding Caroline's tricycle." And of course, it's not lost on anybody in the audience. Ted Dealey's from Texas, and he's drawing on the stereotype image of a masculine man riding a horse, wearing a hat. That's the Texas image, right? And juxtaposed against that is the feminine image of a man riding a little girl's tricycle. And this is after a series of letdowns in Ted Dealey's eyes, where JFK had repeatedly backed down to the Soviets in head-to-head confrontations from 60 to 63. We went through a list of that in the first videos. And people thought he had his hand on the chicken switch and that he was soft on communism. Ted Dealey said it right to his face. So this is George Dealey and of course his son Ted Dealey. I'm going to walk a little bit here and we are going to make our way towards Elm Street, and purpose in doing that is to show you just what a perfect location Dealey Plaza was for a triangulated shoot. The planners or the conspirators in this whole scenario did not just pick one location. They had backups for the backup. So, for example, the first chosen location for the assassination in Dallas was where he landed at Love Field. That wasn't going to work. They knew pretty quick because the crowds, it was so congested. So many people had come out to see the president. That's where the motorcade lined up. There's just too many people. A lot of people come out just to see Jackie. And so, remember, one of their goals was to avoid as much collateral damage as possible. Collateral damage means wounds. Wounds to people, which means bullets, which means too many bullets for a lone assassin, which means you're probably going to be dealing with a conspiracy right from the get-go. They want the wounds to be limited to JFK if possible. And so there's just too many people. So the second location, the alternate location, is Dealey Plaza. And when you enter this plaza and you see how small it is, and the configuration of the streets and the buildings, it makes perfect sense. Camera around again. So they make the turn here at the courthouse, the 90-degree turn from Maine onto Houston, and just imagine the motorcade proceeding along like my camera is proceeding along. right into the beginning of what we now know as a kill zone. You've got a shooter, according to Roscoe White in the ONI memo, there's a shooter nicknamed Saul, or codenamed Saul, in this building, where, of course, at this light, the motorcade is going to come to a halt. Possibly didn't come to a halt because the lights were turned off for the purposes of the motorcade, but you still got to make a 120-degree turn. That's going to slow the vehicles down. And then right across the street, catty corner from where I am, is the Dal Tech building, which, according to the arrest record and the Dallas police records, Eugene Braden was in this building. He's the spotter for David Morales, the CIA assassin. He's a self-acknowledged CIA assassin. So you probably have David Morales in this building. And then across the street, Texas School Book Depository, we already know that in the 6th floor, because of a fingerprint that was found, that Mac Wallace, LBJ's assassin, was in this building. So you have 3 assassins, notorious assassins, in these 3 buildings, right at the point at which the motorcade has to make a 100-degree turn onto Elm Street. And and it's all very close. All these these snipers, these assassins, have high-powered rifles with scopes. It's like looking at somebody sitting right in a chair right next to you. So once the motorcade makes the turn onto Elm and proceeds along, it now is being pushed by these snipers behind it right into the kill shot from the sniper who is positioned behind the stockade fence on the grassy knoll, whom we know as Mandarin, and of course that is that is the Dallas police officer that we talked about. Excuse me. Roscoe White. This is what happens when you got a million things on your brain, you're getting older, you start to forget names. We've been talking all about Roscoe White. So Dealey Plaza is the perfect location because of the buildings, because of the streets, the way they're laid out, and because of the grassy knoll. And if the assassination can't happen at Dealey Plaza, they have an alternate location. The alternate location is where JFK is heading next. That is the Trade Mart. Trade Mart's where he's giving his speech. And it's interesting, the battle that had gone on to get the president and his people to agree to go to the Trade Mart. Because Kennedy's people, in the lead up to the trip, didn't want to go to the Trade Mart. It's small, and they wanted to go to the Women's Museum. The Women's Museum only has 2 entrances and exits. In fact, it has a big garage door. You can drive the limo right inside the building. So from a security perspective, it's perfect. It's totally defendable. Only 2 entrances and exits, and it's large. It holds a lot more, about 80% more people than the Trade Mart. But LBJ's people, led by LBJ and his friend here on the ground in Texas, Governor John Connally, insisted on the speech being given at the Trade Mart. And this, though it held less than 20% of what the Women's Museum held, they argued it was a newer building and it was closer to the Stemmons Freeway, and they gave a bunch of reasons. And the battle went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The Kennedy people didn't want to go to the Trade Mart because the ceiling is full of catwalks. It's a security nightmare, a logistical nightmare to defend the president. It has 42 entrances and exits, no garage door entrance. It is not defendable. And the thinking was by the conspirators, and of course if you've watched my earlier videos, you know I consider LBJ to be one of the 5 conspirators. The thinking was by the conspirators, if we don't get him at Love Field, if we don't get him at Dealey Plaza, which that means you can't even take one shot at him. You take one shot, he's out of town. He's gone. So you have to make a decision. If you're going to do it, you got to do it. If not, hold off and we'll try it at the alternate location. So if Love doesn't work and Dealey doesn't work, they'll get him at the Trade Mart. They'll have a sniper in one of the catwalks or someone will come into the entrances or exits. It's undefendable. And long story short, they will get him at one of these three locations. However, they even had a contingency plan for the contingency plans. And the next day, according to the itinerary, JFK was scheduled, and the entourage was going to LBJ's ranch in rural Texas. And the thinking by the conspirators was, if we don't get him at Love, if we don't get him at Dealey, if we don't get him at the Trademark, we will get him at LBJ's ranch. Either way, JFK was not going to be permitted to leave Texas alive. And of course, we all know as history unfolded, Dealey Plaza ended up being the chosen location. The security had been stripped away sufficiently by the Secret Service. The motorcade route had been changed. There's an old saying, if you can't bring the shooters to the target, bring the target to the shooters. And the original route of the motorcade, again, from here, I'm on Elm Street now, you can see across where that traffic is crossing, that is Main Street. And that is originally the straight route that goes all the way down through that middle, see if I can see it here, through that middle part of the triple underpass. It would have been a very difficult shot to take him if he was on Main Street. So they brought the target to the shooters, and they had them all ready in these buildings. Over there they had him in they had their shooter in the records building. Behind me they had their shooter in the Daltex building, and behind me they had another shooter in the Texas School Book Depository. And then of course they also had a shooter on the grassy knoll. So the 90-degree turn from Houston onto Maine was necessary, even though it was a violation of Secret Service protocols, to get him to this kill zone. And then you turn him 120 degrees from Houston onto Elm, and you've set up a perfect scenario, because the limo, according to Secret Service protocols, is never supposed to be below 25 miles an hour. It's supposed to be between 25 and 30 miles an hour at all times. A moving target is the best security. It's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And so they wanted to keep him moving. Normally, that's what they did. But when he made this turn, 120-degree turn from Houston onto Elm, the museum slowed down to approximately 11 miles an hour, and that's when the shooting started. And of course, we now know, because of the Zapruder film and because of witnesses, that the limo driver, William Greer, hit the brakes. So it slowed down even further. And just to give you an illustration, Clint Hill got out of the car in back of him and ran on foot. He was dressed in a suit and tie and dress shoes, ran on foot and caught the limo, jumped up to protect Jackie. And that's how slow the limo in front of him was going. This wasn't a marathon runner or a sprinter we're talking about, but he caught that limo running on foot. That's how slow Greer was moving that car. So that's the reason why Dealey become an ideal location. You've got the security stripped, you've got the ideal driver, you've got open fields of fire. The crowds are very thin by the time you get here to Dealey Plaza. Most of the crowds are behind me on Main Street, the motorcade route. By the time you get to Dealey Plaza, you basically have workers from the Texas School Book Depository who are congregating around that front entrance there, and some on the sidewalks, and you have some stragglers along, and very few actually, stragglers along the sidewalk on the grassy knoll side of the street, and then you have some on the infield. And then you have a few behind us here on Houston. As far as collateral damage, the risks of that in Dealey Plaza are minimal compared to obviously the Love Field. So I want to talk a little bit about Lee Harvey Oswald and some of the little known facts that make him, being the perpetrator of this crime, absolutely impossible. And one involves a rock-solid alibi. But let's talk first about the timing of the entire event. The posted schedule in the Dallas Morning News that morning was that the motorcade was supposed to pass the Texas School Book, which is right in front. In other words, as you were looking here, the motorcade should be turning left from Houston onto Elm at exactly 12:24 p.m. That's the time that was listed. All right, and it was supposed to be on the Stemmons Freeway by 12:25 p.m. I'm going to show you, and you can see off in the distance. You see those cars on that raised interstate past the triple overpass or underpass there. That's the Stemmons Freeway. It's just a little bit past the triple underpass. So back to the timing: 12:24 turning on this corner, 12:25 on that interstate headed to the Trade Mart. That was the posted schedule. So let's just put ourselves in the shoes of the assassin. Say we're Lee Harvey Oswald. He's the alleged assassin. He knows the schedule, and he has prepared the sniper's nest in the 6th floor. And you know he's coming by at 12:24, so common sense tells you would be in that sniper's nest well before that, planning, getting ready, getting your weapon ready, maybe even preparing the sniper's nest, whatever. But you're going to be there waiting for the motorcade to come by. You certainly don't want to miss it, so you're going to err on the side of caution by being there early. However, where was Lee Harvey Oswald? Where was the motorcade? Let's start with that. The motorcade was running 6 minutes late. It did not pass this corner until 12:30, so it's 6 minutes late. And of course, we all know he was shot at 12:30. So in that same minute, he was shot. 6 minutes behind schedule. And where was Oswald that entire time? According to witnesses, we have several witnesses, one of which I will mention a little bit later. But let's just talk about the police officer, Marion Baker, and the building superintendent, Roy Truly, who saw him at 12:31. 1 minute after, it was literally 90 seconds after the assassination. Marion Baker suspected that the shot came from the Texas School Book Depository, which the first shot probably did. It was a diversionary shot, and it got his attention. And so he ran into the building, grabbed the building superintendent, Roy Truly, and together they start running up the stairs. They got to the 2nd floor. This is 12:31. I mean seconds after the shooting. They get to the 2nd floor, and through the break room door, there's a window. They could see somebody. Marion Baker saw somebody, and he burst into the 2nd floor break room. He pulled his pistol and yelled out to Roy Truly, "Who is this man?" And Roy Truly looked at him and said, he works here. Talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. And Oswald was sitting there drinking a Coke, eating his lunch. This is 90 seconds after the assassination. Now, the government narrative is going to come out pretty quickly saying that Oswald acted alone, shot from the 6th floor window. But in order for this timing to work, that means you would have to descend 4 floors of stairs, which there's a landing in the middle. So you're each floor you're descending 2 flights of stairs, and then you're going to have to run across the building to where the break room was, run in, grab a Coke, get your lunch, sit down, all in 90 seconds, and then not be breathing hard or sweating or looking like you just ran down all those flights of stairs. When asked later, when he told this story, Officer Marion Baker, he was asked, was he sweating? Did he look like he was out of breath? Marion Baker said, no, he's just sitting there relaxed eating his lunch. They asked Roy Truly the same thing. He said the same thing. So clearly, we have a problem with the timeline because the president was shot at 12:30. How could the alleged assassin be out of the sniper's nest, come down the stairs? Nobody saw him, right? There were other people who were going up the stairs. He would have passed. Nobody saw him. There he is, 90 seconds later, sitting in the break room, drinking a Coke and eating his lunch. All right, that's a problem. Let me tell you about a bigger problem. And her name is Geraldine Reid. Geraldine Reid worked in the Texas School Book Depository, and I'll just keep the camera on this building. And she had to stay behind. All the other workers were allowed to go out on the front steps and watch the motorcade. But Geraldine Reid was the bookkeeper, and as such, she had to stay with the money box, the cash box. So she stayed in her bookkeeper's office, which was ironically right across from the second floor break room door. She was the door right across from that, the office right across from that. And now, Geraldine Reid is not to be confused with Dolores Reid. There were two Reid ladies who worked at the Texas School Book Depository building. Dolores was just a regular worker. She was out watching the motorcade. When the Warren Commission interviewed both of these Reid ladies, the story they got from Dolores Reid was basically a non-factor. She didn't see anything, hear anything, whatever. But the story they got from Geraldine Reid became a real problem. So they solved that problem by conflating these two Reid women into one, and using the testimony from Dolores Reid to say that when they interviewed Mrs. Reid from the Texas School Book Depository building, they learned nothing that would either support or contradict the narrative or the suspicion that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone and carried out the shooting. It was a real neat trick, because if they had printed what Geraldine Reid said, they got a problem. And here you're going to see real quick why they didn't print what Geraldine Reid said. She testified that Oswald was standing at her desk getting change for the Coke machine when they both heard the gunshots outside. She said, quote, "Mr. Oswald didn't like pennies." Now there's a little story behind that. Oswald was born and raised in New Orleans, a very Confederate town. You go downtown New Orleans, they have a statue to Robert E. Lee. That's their Confederate hero. Lee Harvey Oswald was named after Robert E. Lee. And he was raised in a household to celebrate the Confederacy. And of course, they didn't look too kindly on anything Yankee, especially Abraham Lincoln. So Oswald, probably under the influence of his parents or whomever, never used coins or paper money that had Abraham Lincoln's face on it. So when she says he didn't like pennies, that rings very true, because this is a well-known fact about Lee Harvey Oswald. And here she is adding a little anecdotal piece of information that rings very true about Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, the only reason she would know this is because he was in her office getting change and probably told her this. And it stuck out in her memory. She remembered it. Anyway, she goes, "Mr. Oswald didn't like pennies. I remember that. As I was counting out the change, I heard what I later learned were gunshots. Mr. Oswald and I looked at each other quizzically for a moment, and but neither of us said anything about the sounds. I did not know they were shots at the time. I gave Mr. Oswald the change, and he turned and walked back into the hallway towards the snack room. That's the last time I saw him until he passed by me a few minutes later as he was leaving the building." Okay, and that was 72 seconds, according to her timestamp. That was 72 seconds before Oswald would be confronted by Officer Baker and Superintendent Truly in the break room. In other words, he has a rock-solid alibi. She was interviewed shortly before she died in Fort Worth. They asked her, "Well, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you talk? Why didn't you dispute what the Warren Commission wrote about you in the Warren Report?" And she said, "I was threatened to keep my mouth shut or else." And so through the years, as JFK researchers began to learn of this Geraldine Reid and how she was actually a separate person entirely from Dolores Reid, and the story she told began making the rounds, people started beating a path to her door. They want to know the story. And she refused to be recorded and or published until after her death. Well, interestingly, one of these JFK researchers earned her trust. His name is Robert Groden. By the way, just if you're in Robert Groden, I just shook his hand. He is sitting over in the, I'm going to see if I can, you might not be able to see him from here. He is actually sitting in the pergola of the grassy knoll up there with a table full of books, and he is signing autographs and selling his books and talking to people. I was one of the people that talked to him. He's there right now as we speak. Maybe in a later video when I'm on that side of the street, I'll get a a quick shot of him for you. But Robert Groden earned the trust of Geraldine Reid, who was in the Texas School Book Depository and had this rock-solid alibi. And before her death, she told Robert Groden, "You can publish my story, but wait until I die." So in 2013, Robert Groden published Absolute Proof, which includes this story. This is the bombshell evidence that Robert Groden published in this book, never published before. So in 2013, we learned for the first time that Lee Harvey Oswald had a rock-solid alibi at the time of the shooting. And the Warren Commission was the only other entity that knew this, and they purposely conflated the stories of the two Reids into one and put it under the witness Dolores Reid, because Dolores Reid was not in a position to know anything of any sort of shooting, and that enabled their narrative to go forward. This is one of the reasons why I ascribe to the Warren Commission no respect. I have no regard for the people that were on it, because they willingly signed off to fraud. They knew Geraldine Reid's story, they heard it, and they buried it. And fortunately for us, Robert Groden published it in 2013. That's the story of the field of operations and the alibi, Geraldine Reid.